What's up everyone, Art here. Today I'm doing a bonus install video on a set of OVERTAKE Phenolic spacers. Now we did include them in an EJ inlet video as well. I'll put a link up here for you guys to check that out. But we decided to take this engine that we have and do a more in-depth install so you guys can see exactly where these mount to. Having an engine on a stand like this gives us a great opportunity to show you exactly where these fit, because describing it alone isn't enough. First of all, I'm going to open up one of these boxes and show you what you can expect in it. You can see fresh hardware because you're going to need the extended bolts and some washers, and then the two Phenolic spacers. When you take them out of the packaging, you're going to notice they're kind of this almost hard resin material, and the purpose of these is to be able to space the manifold away from the heads, away from the engine where all the heat is, so you can drastically reduce the heat going through your intake manifold down into the engine. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with where they go, it's pretty easy. Here you have your intake manifold and then your TGVs. You see a little gasket wedged in between there. That's exactly where we're going to place these, and it's going to space the entire manifold and TGV setup 8 millimeters upwards. Outside the Phenolic spacers themselves, you're also going to want to pick up some of the OVERTAKE gaskets. So we have the TGV to head. You're going to want 2 of those, 4 gaskets total, and then we have the TGV to intake manifold. Just the pair will do. And really the hardest part of this install is just getting everything off and slipping the Phenolics in there. I'm going to show you a step-by-step guide on how to do it, and it'll be a little bit easier for you guys to see on this engine outside of the car. The Phenolic spacers are going to fit pretty much every EJ turbo engine from 2002 to 21. The thing I want to mention is there's going to be some variation, especially with this engine being outside of the car. So you guys are going to have a couple things to disconnect that I won't on here, but for the most part, it's going to be about the same. Now, the first thing we're going to start with is taking off the top mount intercooler. It's really easy. All you have to do is remove the clamps from the couplers, from the throttle body, and then the Y pipe behind. And then you have some 12 mils over here. The whole unit will pull right out. With the intercooler out of the way, we can get a look at the intake manifold and where it's going to have to unbolt. Now, technically, you could just separate this from the engine and then slip the gaskets and the Phenolic spacers in, but for the sake of this video, I want to go more in depth and actually remove the entire intake manifold. I would encourage you to do the same, so take a weekend to do it, not just a couple of hours. That way you can clean everything really nicely before you put it all back together, and you can also do some part upgrades along the way, a couple of which I'm going to point out throughout the video. A big one that I would highly recommend doing is the OVERTAKE turbo inlet. That's going to replace this plastic piece right here. These are prone to cracking over time, and they're really restrictive. So this is going to be a nice piece to put in there, but it is a pretty in-depth install. So taking the manifold off, you're going to want to put this in as well as those Phenolic spacers. I think the first place to start is going to be pulling the throttle body assembly off. Now, you're not going to have to disconnect all of this. You can just do the 4 bolts right there. It'll come off the manifold, and then we should be able to snake everything out around it. And just like that, the throttle body is loose off the intake manifold. Now, another part worth mentioning is the OVERTAKE bypass valve recirculation hose. We've got it upgraded right here. Now, that can remain on the setup. It's going to get pulled with the inlet and the manifold, but we do need to get it out of the way for the throttle body to go right there. There's a lot of ways to do this, but where I want to start is on the top side of the manifold. There are going to be differences, as I mentioned, between engines, but they're mostly all the same. So if you guys see something or don't see something that I'm talking about, just use your best judgment. What I'm going to do is go around the top side and take off the obvious stuff You can see the coolant overflow tank right here. I've got a couple of 12 mils and I believe one on the side. So this is going to get removed, and then we can just make our way along the top side, getting these grounds removed. There's one here, there's one here, and then we're going to disconnect fuel lines. Now mine, obviously it's not connected to the car. In yours it will be. So we're going to pull these lines, pretend like this is still connected to the chassis, pull those off so the manifold can go through. Now, one important piece of advice is to label everything. Obviously, it looks self-explanatory when you're working on it, but once everything's apart, you may not know the order of these fuel lines or where the grounds go. So I always use a little label and put it on everything. And of course, you could use this video for reference. One little piece of advice while you're working, you're going to be messing with the fuel lines. Now in some cases, just like mine, you can see this basically disintegrated on me. And I'm not even surprised, this is a 20-plus-year-old engine. So what I would do is have a couple of these lines handy. If you're working over the weekend, you may not be able to get these from an auto parts store, so just have a length of them. It's always a good idea to upgrade these, or even go with a fully upgraded aftermarket fuel system. But either way, you're not going to want to stick that back onto the engine. Now that we have all the large bolts off the top, I'm going to start unbolting and unplugging the wiring harness. Now, a lot of it can stay on the TGVs and manifold, but some of the obvious stuff needs to come off. Down here, we can see the coil packs need to disconnect. And then I can see that this needs to get pulled. The rest of the fuel line and wiring can stay on. And then we can just make our way around the engine and pull all the obvious stuff. Coming around the back side of the engine, there's a couple things we need to unplug on the throttle body. Right there and right there. And then we've got a knock sensor down here that we're going to want to disconnect. Some of these connectors are a little harder than others, and just take your time with them. Hopefully you don't break any. There are replacements online if you guys do mess some up, and you'll probably notice a couple of our connectors are broken given the age of this engine. Now, coming around here on the turbo side, we're gonna just loosen up a couple of these hoses. We wanna remove this out of the way. Largely the turbo is gonna remain in place. The only other thing we want is to loosen the turbo inlet. So get down here, there's gonna be a clamp, and just loosen that up, and the inlet will go with the manifold. We're going to remove this top mount intercooler bracket. That's just a couple of 12 mils. It'll pop right off. And then the remainder of the harness on the passenger side. You can see the main bulkhead, that's gonna come right off. And then the same thing we did on the other side. Those coil packs, the cam sensor here, and then the AVCS all need to get disconnected. You can see what I mentioned about some of these old broken plastic connectors. This is one that's definitely going to need to be replaced before I put this engine in a car. Coming back around to the front side of the engine, you can see that our alternator and AC pump are missing, but if you have them equipped, you don't need to remove them. They're on a separate harness, so it makes it a little bit tighter, but you can get away with not doing that. This actually gives you a nice visual representation of taking the crank position sensor off, and then coolant temp right there. And then we've pretty much got everything off. Now, if you've ever done a job like this, you know that you're gonna miss one or two things. They become pretty obvious when you start pulling stuff off. So if I didn't cover it, just be vigilant, take a little bit of your time, and just make sure you're not yanking something off like a connector or wiring harness. Since we're gonna be pulling the manifold and the TGVs all as one unit, we can ignore the smaller 10 mils for now and go straight to the 4 12 mils, one here, one on the backside, and 2 on the center. And then the whole unit's gonna be able to get pulled off with a couple of other disconnects. Those 8 bolts that I pulled were pretty crusty, but the good news is we've got replacement bolts with the Phenolic kit. You can see they're a little bit longer to make up for that 8 mil of extra space. Now I did wiggle the manifold and it seems like it's pretty loose. I did notice the PCV is still connected here, so I'm gonna disconnect this hose and then we should be ready to pop this off and just assess any other things we've forgotten. Here's a good example of something that I overlooked, which is the little connector on the power steering, but I caught it before I ripped it out. Surprisingly enough, we disconnected everything that we needed to and it came right out. The only point I was a little hung up on was the coolant crossover hose right here. So if you guys wanted to, you could pull that entirely off before the manifold and then we just got cut up right here. Otherwise, it pulled right out. Now, the first thing that I'm gonna do is protect the inside of the cylinders here to make sure no dust or debris fall in. You guys can see there's a lot of crust and rust, things that we're gonna probably wanna blow off with an air gun and get that out of there. And then the next step for us is gonna be to clean up the mating surface around here really nicely. Depending on the condition of your mating surface, you might need to take extra steps. Mine is actually pretty clean. There's not a lot of gasket residue. So I'm just gonna take a nice sharp razor blade and just being careful, clean that up just like this. Then afterwards, we're gonna get a little brake clean on it and just make sure it's nice and polished before we put the new gasket and the Phenolic spacers back on. Now that we've got both sides reasonably cleaned up, we're ready to reinstall. So we can take out that pair of TGV gaskets, and these actually only have one orientation. You can see there's a couple of dowel pins, one here and here. Now you may notice the holes are a little undersized. That is deliberate. You're supposed to take a small socket like this one and just feed it right on there so they don't move their place when you put the Phenolic on.
That's the noise Daddy likes.
That's it. The Phenolic spacer fits in the exact same orientation on those dowel pins, just like that. And then the other gasket is just gonna kind of float on top. When we get the manifold on, we're just gonna wanna make sure that it hasn't moved and all 4 of those big bolts fit into it. I did mention earlier in the video that you're gonna need 2 sets of these gaskets, so 4 total. That's because the other 2 are gonna go on this side and they're gonna align just the same way. The other gaskets I recommend replacing while you have everything apart are the OVERTAKE intake manifold to TGV. Those are gonna be just right here, and these smaller 10 mil bolts, pretty easy to pop off. Again, clean that surface a little bit, put those in there, and reassemble everything. Now, I also wanted to take this opportunity to show you just how crusty and old the factory inlet is. You can see it starts warping over time. There's cracking and kind of scarring. Basically, it's coming apart and it's causing vacuum leaks. So you definitely want to use this opportunity to upgrade to an OVERTAKE turbo inlet just like this. It's going to save you so much time to do it right now. Now that you guys have your OVERTAKE inlet equipped, you can take the entire intake manifold over to your engine, and then don't forget to take all the rags and plugs out of the cylinders. You do not want to start your engine with those. From there, you're going to want to lay the manifold down, and once you've snaked everything through, just make sure that this top gasket hasn't moved out of position. You can kind of lift this up and realign it, make sure that it all visually works. By the time you've got everything equipped, you're going to want to put those supplied bolts and washers in. Those are going to slip just in there. A word of caution on those bolts, these are really nice and high quality units, so it would be really easy to over torque and damage the threading. This is just 18 foot-pounds, so use a torque wrench or just lightly tighten it. Do not over tighten. I've myself damaged those threads before. You don't want to do that. It's going to take me a little bit of time to finagle this back in its spot before I torque those 8 bolts down, so I'm going to save you guys the headache of having to watch that. Basically, what you're going to want to do is go all the way around the manifold once it's seated, reconnect all the connectors you guys saw me take off, bolt everything back down, and then do a triple check around everything. I'm going to move through this, and then I'll meet you guys at bolting the throttle body back up. I would say getting the manifold back into place is probably the hardest part of this install, especially the turbo inlet onto the turbo itself. But you guys can manage. If you got this far, you're going to be able to reinstall it. Just take your time. Don't get too frustrated. Now, I want to show you the gaskets aligned over here in the phenolic spacer. Once you have everything on, before you put those large bolts in, you can move around that top side gasket. Remember, the underside and the phenolic are held in place by those 2 pins, but the top side does have play in it. You should just match it to the bottom here, and then it'll all sandwich together. And you can start dropping your bolts in one at a time, just making sure that you're getting them threaded by hand before you're using any tools on it. I can feel it engage right there, so I can move on to the 2 side ones. And of course, just a friendly reminder, make sure the washer is on these before you put them on. Same thing on this other side. I've got them all dropped in there. I made sure the gasket is aligned, nothing moved out of place when we put the manifold on. Now we can go through, tighten these with just a socket wrench, and then eventually get a torque wrench on this. And as I mentioned, it's 18 foot-pounds for these. So just go in changing order and make sure it's all snugged up, not too tight on one side before you do the other. And with that, we are wrapped up with the install of the phenolic spacers and gaskets themselves. Everything is good and torqued down. Now really what you need to do is go back through it and reattach all the stuff you took off to get the manifold removed, and that's where labeling comes into place. Also, going back to the beginning of this video and just referring to all the stuff we went around and disconnected, mostly it's going to be harness things and then a couple bolts up top and getting the intercooler back on. For the most part, this is a pretty straightforward install. Just make sure you double, even triple check everything before you fire the car back up, especially all the fuel line routing. Make sure you got that right. And otherwise, it's a great little upgrade to install these phenolics, especially if you're going to be removing the manifold and refreshing your engine. Let's face it, if you have an EJ at this point, it probably deserves a refresh, especially the turbo versions like this. So good little upgrade to do over the weekend. You guys can pick these up in the bio link or on overtakeusa.com. And of course, if you like what we're doing with parts like this and media like this, just follow along at Overtake USA.